Hang on, I'm going to hand you these so that, yeah, if you just stand closer to me, then they can hear.
Do that.
You can stand close to me.
I get to introduce my daughter, Michelle Joy Goff, to you. If I can.
She may not be able to, and that's okay too.
Michelle is the oldest of 4 girls for my husband, David, and her grandparents are sitting here as well, my parents, George and Barbara Brown. So she has a wonderful spiritual legacy, but she has heard the call of God to her personally, and she has answered and has been useful in the kingdom here in the North America and South America, through Central America also. She founded Iron Rose Sister Ministries, and she's very qualified to lead this ministry. She had been a full-time missionary in Venezuela, living in Caracas, and the church one of the congregations started in her apartment there. She lived full-time there. She's very bilingual. She's able to pick up the accents of different countries, blend in with the culture as well as the people, and be very useful as a woman there in supporting the church there. Working groups, also women's days, and traveled all through the area there. She then came back to the States and worked LSU campus ministry, and was very useful in the women there.
Go Tigers.
Yes, we are Tiger fans, LSU Tiger fans. We know how to spell go. G-E-A-U-X. So, and then God put on her heart to launch Iron Rose Sister Ministries. And iron, because of iron sharpening iron. Rose, because as women we are beautiful, but we do have thorns. And sister, because we need each other. And in the process of this, she has traveled and done ladies' days across the Americas in English, Spanish, and bilingual. And she has authored 6 books, women's Bible study materials, that if you go to the table that we have set up here, you'll be able to see those. They're written in English and in Spanish, and then we now have one in Portuguese. God has opened many doors and has worked very well in this. And she is going to get to present the most recent book and the materials of One Single Reason. I invite you to listen to my daughter, Michelle. Thank you.
It's really cool when mom gets to introduce you, right? And I am very blessed to be able to come from a legacy of faith. And you know that I mentioned to some of you earlier that I will be kind of looking at my screen a little bit more so in greeting those that are joining us remotely and those that are watching this later, because we have some who are joining us through a webinar, some on Facebook Live, and we're just so glad to be able to be here. And I'm grateful to the Harding Lectureship Committee for inviting me to speak on this topic, because it's something that we often don't talk about. It is a topic that is not normalized in our conversations, especially in different church contexts. And so what I want us to look at this morning is a celebration of how God has designed many of the singles in the world, but especially single women, to serve him in special and unique ways. And one of the verses that highlights this is found in 1 Corinthians 7, verses 34 and 35. And it says, an unmarried woman or virgin is concerned about the Lord's affairs. Her aim is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit. But a married woman is concerned about the affairs of this world, how she can please her husband. I am saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. There are a lot of different passages that become kind of foundational and seminal in this conversation. And to me, this is one of those key ones. Who can you think of? We're going to be kind of a little bit interactive, at least with those in the room. I wish I could do the live end of this, but I am not that talented in multitasking. So I'm going to ask those of you that are here physically in the room, can you name a single woman in the Bible? Single or single again? Name one. Naomi, yes. Who else? Lydia. Ruth. If we're going with the Naomi story, we're also going with Ruth. They were single again. We can also look at Mary and Martha. We can also look at Hagar, because Abraham basically let Sarah send her off, and then she was dealing with the struggles as a single mom. We have so many, and the way that Jesus himself saw and valued many of the single women that he encountered is very hope-giving. He sees those that many times others are not seeing or are not recognizing. And one of the things that to me has become so important about this conversation is that if you look at the US population, depending on your source, there is between 31 and 51% of the population that is either single or single again. But is that the same breakdown of demographics that we see in the church? Not usually. No, there's a much greater population of families, which is wonderful. Somebody said, I'm so glad you're talking about this conversation of elevating singleness in the conversation, but not in a way that knocks down or degrades or diminishes the beautiful importance of marriage. Because each and every one of those things has their place. That's the context of 1 Corinthians 7. Paul is saying, wherever you find yourself, be content in that. Don't let your longing for another life steal the joy of the one that you're in currently. And so if you're married, awesome. Live that and do that to the fullest. If you're single, awesome. Love that and do that to the fullest. But maybe that isn't celebrated as much. And so we need to celebrate that, to recognize that, because the median age, the average age for marriage, so I don't have all the stats memorized, but they're in different parts of the book. So I'm going to read some of them straight from here. The average age for women to get married in 1950, anybody want to guess what it was?
18.
20. It's 20. But that means that there were some that were getting married at 15, 18, and 19. And some that maybe all the way up to 25, but the average was 20. Okay. Anybody want to guess the average age in 2019?
40.
Somebody said 40, somebody said 24, 30, 28. There has been a steady rise, and then from about 2016 all the way to now, it's kind of plateaued a little bit, but each decade kind of saw just a steady rise in the average age for marriage. Well, so here at Harding, when a lot of people are talking about finding a mate and whether or not you can get out of here with or without one. So I'm going to read this. My undergraduate degree was obtained at Harding University, a private Christian university in Central Arkansas, known for saying things like, turn to your right or left. That may be your spouse. How many of you heard that? You don't have to raise your hand. I know you have. The emphasis on marriage and finding a spouse within a strong pool of possibilities made the term marriage factory a common descriptor for the university. Many of the parents of those students, my own included, met in college and married. Following in their parents' footsteps, many young women had the goal and expectation of obtaining her MRS, a marriage license, being a higher priority than a BA, BS, or other professional licensure. Admonitions like, it's easier to fish in a pool of fishes, while true, can place undue added pressure on someone to find a spouse before one or the other is ready. If you didn't catch a fish before graduation, then you might feel like that you're a failure. But what was that average age for marriage? 28, not 21 or 22. But that pressure is not exclusive to Christian universities. Many church camps campus young professional groups can intentionally or inadvertently create the same atmosphere. The perceived pressure is a combination of internal unmet desires and external contributing factors. In any of the context mentioned above, I wish they would have said, turn to your right and to your left. These are the kingdom workers with whom you are building foundational relationships and lifelong friendships. These are your future teammates in church plants and in missions, your kindred spirits in business and in service, as well as some of the Christian brothers and sisters with whom you will celebrate the joys of life and mourn its losses. I have been blessed to have established some of those friendships and those relationships, not just during my college years here, but during many of my single years, still unmarried, in various contexts, in various cities. And those are the people with whom I long to continue to be amazing kingdom workers. As Philippians says, 1:5, they can be our partners in the gospel. And so when we look at the way in which this conversation is or isn't happening in a lot of the different contexts, one of the things that we need to note is that, as this single woman in Oklahoma said, talk about being single. Talk about scriptural teachings on being single. Talk about it as a valid life choice, an important state, an offering to God. Scripture said that it is good to be single and serve God with undivided attention. But we don't act that way. And talk about it to the kids. I came out of high school ready to get married with a well-developed theology for being a wife and mother. But life looked like long-term singleness. I felt very alone and didn't have any kind of theology for understanding it. And there's just no reason for that. In general, there's kind of a lack of theology or a lack of conversation about singleness. And as someone who has worked as a full-time minister in various contexts for my whole career as a single woman, I have been privileged to be at the table, to be that voice, to have those conversations with countless women all across the Americas, as Mom was mentioning. Had that conversation with many of you that are connected online with us. And so through all of that, I wrote One Single Reason, Conversations with Single Women. You'll notice that as I was reading some different things, I was reading from a really thin book and I was reading from a thicker book. Well, everything in this thinner book is here in the thicker book. I just used it as an excuse to show you this one. And the difference is that the thinner book is called Congregational Strategies. It's one of the 7 sections book, and it is an invitation to the conversation, because many people are not even aware of what they don't know. We don't know what we don't know. It's just a truth of life. And so this allows someone to be invited into the larger conversation through these different parts of those chapters, like love is our one single reason, the language we use. Think of like an announcement on Sunday mornings. We would like for every family to be there at the picnic next Saturday. Or we hope to see everyone there for the picnic next Saturday. Those little differences matter. They make a difference. So that language that we use, what to say and what not to say, how to not stick your foot in your mouth. That could have been the subtitle. Feeling solo on Sundays. Should we start a singles ministry? I get that question a lot, and I'm going to speak to that in a minute. And then church family as community, because that's really what God is calling us to. Those one another relationships. And that's part of what's celebrated through the full conversation, through the full book, is being able to elevate the conversation about our relationship with God and our relationship with one another. Earlier, someone was talking about Well, Mary Lee, I'm going to call your name out because I know you and I love you. And so we were talking about the Bible class that she's in right now, and it's about marriage and family, and it's a married couple that is teaching the class, and they are facilitating and having conversations that a lot of times are not had in our churches. I love that. I'm trying to do the same thing with singleness. We need to be able to have those conversations and get into those discussions about things that we often don't talk about in the church. But if we're not talking about these things in the church with our Christian brothers and sisters, then where are we getting our information? With whom are we having these conversations? So let's seek God at the head of the table. Let's hear each other's voices, and let's talk about it. And after each section of the book, there's a portion that I call table talk, and there's a part that's table talk with God. It's kind of your own little reflection questions, you know, that meditation time, that devotional time, that time of just prayer and communication with him. There's table talk with an Iron Rose sister, and Mom described how an Iron Rose sister is a Christian sister that we want to be like that iron sharpening iron. Sometimes there are things that you can share with a couple of one or two women that you aren't necessarily going to share with a whole group. But there are some things that we want to and need to be able to hear some of the other perspectives. And so then there's table talk with one another, where we get to listen and learn and love and come into that conversation together. And then we don't want to just talk about it. We want to actually put it into action. And so then we walk the talk. And that's at the end of each section as well. And so, as I mentioned, when we come to the table, I know it's a round table right there, but that is because we want each of us to have an equally valued voice in that conversation. But we want to still be sure that God is seated at the head of the table. And so there are three voices that I most wanted to represent with this conversation. One is God's, through a lot of scripture. There are a lot of Bible verses in here and a lot of scripture that is quoted. The second one is my own voice, because as a single woman, through the experiences that I have had, I have some stories to share and some examples and some laughs and some transparency. And then the third voice is the voice of other women. And I have done that through different surveys, through interviews, through a lot of different means, and just through the experience that I have had. And so as I'm talking about this, you may be thinking, okay, well, what kind of singles is she even talking about? And if you even know to ask that question, good for you, because you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Have any of you seen Princess Bride? Don't worry, it's not a test. It's just one of our favorite movies. So when we talk about the term singles, who or what are we talking about? In its simplest form for church contexts, a single person is someone who is not currently married. However, was this individual married at some point previously? Does she have children? Is she widowed? Does the young professional college graduate have the same single status as the divorced woman without kids? And what of those who choose to be single versus those who long to find a spouse? Contented singles or frustrated ones? Singles. And that's not an exhaustive list. In a society that celebrates individuality, we cannot possibly highlight all of the variations and nuances to each person's specific story. So as we make generalized comments that traffic in stereotypes, the greatest encouragement is to build relationships with members of the body from diverse walks of life. So when I did the official survey and when I conducted the official interviews and follow-up questions, all kinds of things like that, there were 220 women that participated. Here's the breakdown of their single or single again status, because I included the single again all as I refer to them in one general category throughout the book. And in general, the tendencies for their answers followed the same pattern. So 71% of the women were single, never married, that participated in this survey. And the rest were either divorced, widowed, separated, or there were a few other specific cases there. they were of all ages, literally. Like you see how even the disbursement is between all the different age groups. So we are not, I did require that they were at least 18. So I wasn't surveying, younger teens. They needed to at least be 18. And then all the way up to, there were some that responded that were in their 80s. So we got a really good range here. So some good perspectives from different age groups. And that's also important. Also, just for purposes of the survey, I was asking what church they grew up in, what church they attend currently. The majority, yes, were associated with the Churches of Christ, but not exclusively. But all but 6% did claim some sort of faith of some type. And as Mom mentioned, I call Spanish my nerdy passion and God my first one. And having traveled and worked all across the Americas, then I also conducted this survey was in English and in Spanish. What was very interesting about that is that in the Hispanic culture, you have those that when you say single in that context, it's of that as not in a relationship at all versus not married. Do you understand the difference? So if you had a singles retreat or some sort of singles activity, then those that are dating or in any sort of relationship would not be going to that, would not consider themselves single because they have, I don't want to say a partner because I don't want to, they are in a relationship. You understand how that could be perceived differently in different contexts or different cultures. And that even those things are part of why we want and need to be able to come to the conversation and understand that different people hear different things, even if we're saying the same thing. So one of the other questions that I asked was, would you like to get married? And I gave them 3 options for the answer. Yes, please, maybe, or no, thanks. Anybody want to guess what percentage said, well, which do you think was the highest percentage? Okay, some were saying yes and some were saying maybe. Yes, please did have the highest percentage. Anybody want to guess what it was?
65%.
Just under half. 49% said yes, please. 41% said maybe, so it was really close. And then 10% said no thanks. Predominantly among the no thanks were those that were single again, which makes sense for various different reasons. One of the other factors that was a great contributor to their answer to this question was whether or not they had children or were a guardian for someone.
Was age a factor?
Their age was not as much of a factor at all, which was very interesting. And since you mentioned that, I do have, because there are various things and results from the survey that I mention and that I reference in the book. But in order to maintain this on a more conversational level, I don't get into some of the statistical analysis to that deeper layer like I do in this handout that's available for download on our website, or if you're really interested today, I do have some copies of that today. But I love your question about whether or not age was a factor, and interestingly, that was not as much of a factor here. And then there were a few people that said, I really don't like this question, because it's a way more complicated answer than checking a box of yes, please, maybe, or no, thanks. But that goes back to we want and need it to be a part of our conversation. So of all of those women, 73% said that they were content in their singleness, which I really was glad to celebrate. Way more are content in their singleness than are not, but I also think that it depended on the day they answered the survey. How many of you would agree with that? Right? And that's true of a lot of different things that we do or don't feel content in. But one of the other interesting questions that I asked was I asked them which groups they found most supportive. So they had to rank these from 1 to 6 on which group they felt was most supportive. Anybody want to guess which group was most supportive? It was family and then friends, with not much difference between the two. And I'm glad to say that I personally have definitely, as we see from the front row, had the support of family. So this family had the highest percentage of most supportive, with 41%. And 76%, over 3/4 of those that did the survey, ranked family in the top 3 for most supportive groups. That's wonderful. That's fantastic. It means that within their families, within our families, there is support. Again, friends was the second group, but because here we are, especially with the lectureship, we are here talking with and talking about things in a church context. I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into how they ranked their local congregation. So there was more diversity of responses for this group than for any other group. In other words, you see how the graph has it's just all over the place. Because the lowest percentage of those that did mark that it was the most supportive group, but for everything else, it's just all over the map. But here's what's interesting. Less than half ranked local congregation in the top 3. Well, what that shows us, and there are additional statistical layers that we could go into, but I don't want to get too technical today. What that shows us is, in general, they are not feeling like support comes from that church context. If you look at it in order of most supportive to least supportive, family, 41% of the people marked family as most supportive. 35.5% people marked friends as most or strongly supportive. And then work or academic community was actually found to be more supportive than local congregation. Then local community and online community, the other options that were given, were found to be less and least supportive in that order. It's interesting to me. But what does this mean? It means it's all about relationship. Where do we have and where do we form these relationships? Well, first of all, that relationship has to be with God. I was so excited that over 85% of the women agree that their relationship with God has been strengthened through their singleness. Because it is a spiritual journey. It is a spiritual battle sometimes, and sometimes it's a spiritual victory. But through it all, it is a deepening of relationship with God. One of the other things that I asked was, how did it affect relationship with other Christian women? As a ministry, Iron Rose Sister Ministries, what our main goal is to equip women to connect to God and to one another more deeply. And so that's why I wanted to ask some of these questions about how has your singleness affected your relationship with God and your relationship with other women, the one anotherness that we need to be about. While over 85% said that they felt like their relationship with God had been strengthened, only 71% said that their relationship with other women had been strengthened, which we also kind of understand. That makes sense, right? Just intrinsically, we kind of get that. Because sometimes, ladies, we can not treat each other as well as we would like or should. And we can all learn about how to be more supportive of one another. We can all learn. And so a lot of what this walks through is how to better support one another. A lot of what this walks through is how can we be in the trenches together and have these conversations that sometimes we avoid, and we have them with God, it sounds like, which we do, but let's get into how we can be more supportive of one another. And so in that local congregation context and dynamic, you've already seen about how they ranked the congregation as far as how supportive it was. There was a different question that asked, how much encouragement do you get from your local congregation? And so that's what this one is about. That's what this one, I'm now pointing on the other screen, there you go, is about. And as you see, more found their local congregation encouraging than discouraging, which is good news. But that's still over 37% found their local congregation discouraging or very discouraging, which is discouraging to hear. So can we do better? Absolutely. But here was another really cool thing. 67% of women that were surveyed in this agree that it is easy to find ways to serve in her local congregation. That's another thing to celebrate. Are there a lot then, 33%, that are still trying to figure out ways and how to serve in her local congregation? Yes. So what does this mean? Why are you showing us all of these things? Because for me, in my personal walk with God, for me, in my conversation, wow. Yeah, I get excited about this stuff. So in my conversations with lots of women in lots of places, I have come to realize that it is all about not just relationship, but also about purpose. And if you don't believe me, let's just look at where some of these things are referenced. And I may have now, nope, I just turned it off. And so not broken, yay. I won't throw it again though. If relationship and purpose, how do we see relationship and purpose in the greatest command? What's the greatest command? Go love God and love others. That's the greatest command. And the greatest commission, yes. And that's why we're kind of almost interchanging the quoting of those. So love God and love others. See how much that's about relationship and purpose? As we love ourselves, which many single women have some challenges about loving themselves or feeling like they are loved. I know. You're going, oh man, I want to have this conversation. Oh, we need to have this conversation. I know. Isn't it exciting? Let's have these conversations. So the greatest command, love God and love others as you love yourself. All about relationship and purpose, because our purpose then is to love him and to love others. And then with the Great Commission, that one, yes, is go into all the world and teach what? The gospel, the good news. What I have commanded you. Teaching them and teaching them. It is all about relationship and purpose. And in the book, I mentioned that, but then I also give this really cool exercise, how John 15 illustrates and brings that to light through the vine and the branches and abiding in him. Oh, it is amazing and beautiful to see how John 15 highlights and illustrates how it really is about relationship and purpose. And so helping single women understand where and how relationship and purpose fits and works and how those dynamics are becomes so encouraging when we can celebrate what that is and how it's defined in those ways. However, there's always a but, isn't there? We get caught up in a lot of things that hinder us from fulfilling this. Anybody want to guess what any of those hindrances might be? There are 4 of them that came up time and time and time again. What hinders us from fulfilling these relationship and purpose goals?
Fear.
Yes, fear is definitely one of them. What else? I know, I'm working on it. It's because this dropped, but we're hopefully having someone to do it with, yes.
Yeah.
No, I know, it's getting back to it.
Expectations
Oh, expectations, that's a big one.
or unmet expectations.
Oh, yes, yeah, that's a big one. What else? All right, I'll tell you. I call them cage traps, and I know I spelled it wrong, but just humor me for a minute. Comparisons. Would you agree that's a big trap and a big hindrance? Assumptions. Judgments. And expectations. And even the fear that was mentioned, and what was the other one that was mentioned? Not having anyone to do it with, yes, because even that is an assumption, expectation that, okay, I need these people and I have to, and I can't do it by myself. And there are all of those fears and all of those, it really all boils down to these things. But we so want to and long to break out of that trap. And God provides us those ways to become free and to fulfill those relationship and purpose desires of our heart. And sometimes what he does is he transforms them. I love to tell the story of how one of my biggest dreams was to be a mom. I have 3 younger sisters. I think it came from that. But when everybody else was taking a veil, pillowcase, that's the word, and making it a veil and pretending to walk down the aisle, I was carrying the babies or one of my sister. And, I just always dreamed of being a mom. Even in 6th grade, before it was as common as it is today, I wrote a paper on international adoption. God had plans. I was working towards these desires of my heart, but I graduated from Harding, unmarried, unattached, and I didn't know where or how some of those desires were going to be fulfilled. Well, long story short, he told me and reminded me that spiritual children are as much or more important than children that I would birth. One of the dreams that I had was, as Mom mentioned earlier, to share my middle name, Joy, with any daughters that I might have or adopt. I liked the name. Actually, sitting in a Christian home or Christian family class here at Harding, a friend of mine and I that sat next to each other, we would write down and we were trying to figure out names for our kids. And she said, "Oh, I love the name Hannah." And I told her about my desire to share the name Joy. And she's like, "Oh, Hannah Joy, that's really pretty." And someone that she married before our senior year, and their daughter is Hannah Joy. And I thought, well, okay, at least somebody else got to use it. When I was doing campus ministry down at LSU, one of the evenings that I was talking with the girls about just some of these desires and how some of them were unmet expectations. But then I looked around the room and there were girls from 4 different countries. And because we were in Louisiana, we knew Ohio was almost like another country. So we counted her as the 5th one. It was international adoption. Well, one of the girls that was there, she was not a Christian at the time, but was coming and was interested. And her boyfriend, who she was living with at the time, he would come to our student center in a long trench coat and dark eyes and just no eye contact. And long story short, I was befriending them, and I was studying the Bible with her. And in the course of less than a year, she was baptized, they got married, and he was baptized. So she kept coming to the study, and she would tell us that she told us she was expecting, and then each week she would tell us the size of the baby, you know, by like whether it was a bean or then it was like a kumquat or something, I don't remember, and then it was like a lemon, and then it was, you know, each week she had a different fruit or vegetable for how big the baby was. And we were so excited. They didn't want to find out the gender, and they didn't tell anybody any names they were picking. But as soon as Noah James was born, I, of course, was carrying him around and taking care of him anytime they were at church or anytime. And so, of course, I took care of him for the first time, for the parents to be able to go out and have a moment to themselves. Don't worry, I've got this. He's got me. I got him. I mean, I really felt like he was my spiritual grandson. Well, not long after that, he hadn't even turned 1. I moved away. And one day I got a text from her, and it said, "Sweet pea." And I replied back, "Congratulations!" And I was just so excited. So she said, "My husband thought you weren't going to figure it out, but I knew you would." Of course I figured it out. So for the next 9 months, she would text me different things, and I followed along. And then when they shared a picture of the baby, I was like hitting like, I don't think love was out yet on Facebook. I was hitting all the right things. And so then she texted me and she said, "I would like to introduce you to Abigail Joy, named for the one who gave me a thirst for living water." I just bawled, because especially at that particular point in my life, I had been affirmed that I was not going to be able to have any children in the traditional sense. But the spiritual children are all over the place. And there are those spiritual grandchildren that, whether or not they have my name or anybody else's name on a birth certificate, what's most important is that they carry Christ's name. And so when we can talk about these things and share these joys and share the frustrations and share in all of that, we can elevate this conversation and facilitate this conversation in a greater way and avoid these traps. We can recognize how God can totally transform the desires of our heart for relationship and for purpose. And we can learn how to support one another. So here's what I want us to do, even right now. I want you to turn to, whether it's, 2 or 3, just turn to somebody next to you. And I want you to tell her what is something every single person in this room has in common. One thing that makes you uniquely you, and one thing you've learned today. And for those of you that are watching online, go ahead. You can do that in the comments. You can do that through the webinar chat. And we will be reading these things and sharing them together. So if you're not able to see the screen and you're just listening to the audio, the 3 things that you can share with someone is what every single person has in common. One thing that makes you uniquely you, and one thing you've learned today. Don't overcomplicate it.
Okay. And what's the third one?
Don't overcomplicate it. Just come on. Just answer quickly. And don't go quite yet. I have something else for you. I know. Don't worry, we'll be out by 10 till.
That a lot of people absolutely right.
I'm going to give you 1 more minute. 1 more minute.
I didn't know exactly what I was. And I just started the generation last fall together. I didn't have a family. Just
Okay. Did you learn something? Were you able to listen to something? Did your love for God or for others maybe grow a little bit? I pray so. I'm going to open it up for any questions, and I'm also going to put all of this up here as different things for more information. There is a whole lot more available on our website. There's this book, or these books, I should say, and other of our small group Bible study materials at the booth with the big long red tablecloth. It's really hard to miss right out here in the McIntyre lobby. There's also more information and questions that we can answer there. You can also go to our Facebook page, Iron Rose Sister Ministries. You can follow us on Instagram, Iron Rose Sister. Are you noticing a theme? We try and keep it really easy, really simple, you know, all flows with the same stuff. And if you would like to conduct these surveys in your own congregation, because one of the things that I think is very important, and I mentioned earlier that I said, I get a lot of questions about, well, should we start a singles ministry? Well, first I ask them, how do you define singles? And right there, I learn a lot about where they are in the conversation. And secondly, I ask them, have you talked with the singles in your area? Because yes, these are all these tendencies on all this on a global level, but on that local congregational, local culture level, there are things that are important to note. And so those are some of the things I encourage you with as some of the next steps, and have some table talk with people who were not here in this class to continue this conversation. So in making it again more of a conversation, are there any questions or comments in the last couple of minutes we have?
My only comment is that, you know, I'm an elder's wife, and we have quite a few widows in our congregation. And so I was hoping that this would touch on that and how we can make them feel more part, like you said.
Yes.
Bring your family, and they're just gone, you know. Another group that I was here to kind of, I guess, in the single grouping that you didn't mention, is we have quite a few ladies who come to church that their families do not, that their husbands stay home. And so, you know, this will also help incorporate them as well.
Absolutely. And for those that are listening online, she's talking about the widows in our congregation that, like, when we make that announcement of, yeah, we hope every family, and they don't have their family anymore, or those that are solo on Sundays. So that part of it where I talked about feeling solo on Sundays, that totally fits into the category of that second group you're talking about those who are congregation, you know, in a church context, they are solo on Sundays. And that's just a general term to say that as far as their spiritual walk, they don't have a family or others with them on Sundays or in other ways. Their husbands may be non-Christians or whatever. And so how can we be more supportive and welcoming and just meet the needs? And so I pray that that conversation is able to continue. And I thank you for coming to hear these things on their behalf. So thank you for your comment.
I'm thankful for the conversations. I just think this is wonderful, the ministry and everything. I encourage all of us to not be afraid of singleness, don't be afraid of singles, and in our congregations, just include everyone.
Yes.
Make them part of.
Absolutely. Right.
You know, include.
Yes. Multi-generational, cross-cultural, cross ages. I mean, just everything that we can do. Yes, and being able to serve together is one of the best ways in which we can really build and foster those relationships. Absolutely. Thank you for your comments and for your questions. And I will be around for at least another minute or two, but we also want to be able to respect the group that's coming in for the next lecture. So thank you so much for your attention, and I will head straight from here to the Iron Rose Sister Ministries booth. So if you have any further questions or comments, I would love to follow up with them there or follow up with them with you online. Feel free to email us, to message us within this webinar or through our Facebook page, and we would love to be in touch with you. Thank you so much to everyone who's been a part of this conversation.
Thank you.